Today will be lesson 12 and we will be covering bar lines and measures.
We learned that a staff is used to write music on it. It's composed of 5 lines and 4 spaces. We number the lines from the bottom to the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, and same with the spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. We learned that we could have an 8th note on line 2. We'd have a filled in note head, and we'd want a stem going up on the right with the flag going down and on the right because this note head is below line 3. We learned we could have a quarter note on space 3, filled in note head with a stem going down on the left because this note is above line 3. We could have a half note right on line 3, and default is that the stem goes down and on the left, but there are exceptions to that rule because it's right on line 3. And then there's going to be a whole note, just an open note head, our longest note value. We can put that on space 4. It's just going to fill out that space nicely. We learned that composers will put a clef sign on the leftmost side of a staff. We learned about the treble or G clef used for the right hand of the piano, higher instruments, and female voices. The treble or G clef will start on line 2, bump up to line 3, down to line 1, up and around. And it's called that because of the code embedded in it. This curlicue action around line 2 helps us to know that line 2 is important. That pitch will be called a G, and from there we can decode all the other pitches on, above, or below that staff. And then we also learned about a bass clef or F clef used for the left hand of the piano, lower instruments, and men's voices. It will start on line 4, bump up to line 5, down around half a heart, stopping just under line 2, and then there will be a dot in space 4, one centered in space 3. Those 3 dots together help us know that line 4 is pretty important. If we put a note head there, it will be given the pitch F, hence it being called F clef. And from there we could decode all the other pitches on that staff or above or below it. So remembering that note values are going to be used to show pitch or sound on a score, which pitches to play, and when and how long to play them for. And rests will be used to show silence on a score. So when silence should be begun and how long it should be held for. Remembering also that these note and rest values can only show us the fixed relative value of these notes until they are placed on a score with additional decoding information from a composer. So we can say for sure that a whole note is worth twice as much as a half note is worth twice as much as a quarter note is worth twice as much as an 8th note, and an 8th note is worth twice as much as a 16th note. Likewise, a whole rest is worth twice as much as a half rest, and a half rest is worth twice as much as a quarter rest. A quarter rest is worth twice as much as an 8th rest, and an 8th rest is worth twice as much as a 16th rest. So let's just do a couple of equivalents here. If we have a whole note, we could say that would definitely be equal to a half note plus, say, 2 quarter notes. Okay, we could say for sure that that's true. We could also now combine and say, well, a whole note would also be equal to, well, a half rest and, say, 2 8th notes. We'll break one of those quarters up, plus 4 16th rests. Right? These are all still equivalents. So we're on Unit 2 Rhythm, Lesson 4, and we're covering bar lines and measures. We're going to again read the lesson together. Look at the notes on this staff. Suppose your teacher asked you to play this note. She would have to say, play the 10th note on the staff, and you would have to count from left to right until you found it. Notes are easier to read on a staff when they are divided into groups. Notes are divided into groups with lines called bar lines, like this. So a bar line goes from the top to the bottom of the staff, just like that. And it says the groups of notes between the bar lines are called measures. They can also be called bars, but we'll call them measures. I'm going to use those terms most likely interchangeably because we really do use them interchangeably and we frequently talk about bars, so I'll use both. Measures, bars. Okay, between the area, obviously between two bar lines is one bar. So if we're thinking of numbering them, this would be measure 1, measure 2, measure 3, measure 4. You really could think of them sort of like mile markers. And they're saying it's easier to read. That's true, but a bigger reason is so we can actually be together. So I could say, even though the pianist is not playing the same thing as the guitar player, we can all start together on measure 4, and we can assume we're going to be in the same place. Now your teacher can say, play the second note in the third measure, and you can find it more quickly. So let's just go through that exercise. Let's use red. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there's the third measure, and we're looking for the second note. So that's going to be this, right? So these are our bar lines again. And then this area is our measure or our bar. Musical rule, there's always a bar line at the end of every staff. So you won't have just an open staff at the end. Always a bar line at the end of the staff. Put a bar line after every fourth note. I want to make very clear here, they are not saying every fourth beat, they're saying every fourth note. When we actually start understanding how bar lines function, which we will in the very next lesson already, we'll know that it's not dictated by how many notes per measure. There could be 1 note in a measure, there could be 8 notes in the measure. That won't ultimately determine it, but for now, we're going to just follow their instructions. So 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, so we put a bar line here. 1, 2, 3, 4, put a bar line here. 1, 2, 3, 4, put a bar line here. And 1, 2, 3, 4, put a bar line here. Now it says put a bar line after every third note. So we're going to count here 1, 2, 3 notes. And again, ultimately, there definitely will not be the same number of notes in every measure. There'll be the same number of beats in a measure. And we'll get to that in our next lesson. But for now, we're just going to follow their instructions because they've done the work for us, the math for us. All right, okay. Continuing on, circle the second note in the second measure and the third note in the fourth measure. Okay, so first of all, we just need to number our bars. So we're just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And very often these numbers actually go on the bottom. There's no hard and fast rule about how this is done. You'll see it different ways in different scores, but for now, this will serve our purposes. Okay, so circle the second note in the second measure. So we're looking at this guy. And then the third note in the fourth measure, so we're looking at this guy. Rests can be written in place of notes in a measure like this, right? Circle every half note and every half rest in this example. So let's start with the notes. Remember that a half note, even if you haven't memorized what it looks like, you could think it through. A whole note is going to be that open note head. So a half note, worth half the value of a whole note, is going to be the open note head plus a stem. So let's just find all those notes that fit that rule. All right, so those are our half notes. Now a half rest, remember, is going to be the lighter hat that sits on line 3, and there's actually only one hat at all, and this is it, and that's our half rest. Put 3 quarter notes and 1 quarter rest in each measure using the instructions below the staff. Place the quarter notes anywhere on the staff, some on lines and some in spaces. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and draw all the note heads first. So for a quarter note, remember, we are going to need a filled in note head. So I'm just going to randomly choose some spaces and lines to put this on to practice a variety. So we'll put one in space 1, one on line 3, another note on space 4 or in space 4, filling that area out nicely. Then we're going to skip this because that's going to be a rest. Let's put another note on space 2, skip that, it's going to be a rest. And then we'll put another note on space 3. How about we do one on line 1? Again, skipping the rest here. What haven't I done? Let's put one on line 4, one on line 5, and I'm sure I'm missing one, but here, let's put one on line 2. I think that covers them all. All right, so going through now, I'm going to fill in the rest. So we need our Z with a tail for our quarter rests. Okay, and Z with a tail. All right, now we just need our stems yet. So remember, if the notes are below line 3, they're going to go on the right and up. So I'm just going to pick those notes. Right and up, the right and up, the right and up, and the right and up. And then all the stems that will go down will be all the others, line 3 and above. Down, down and on the left, right? Down and on the left, down and on the left, down and on the left. Finishing up here, using bar lines, divide the staff below into 4 measures, then place 1 half note and 1 half rest in each measure. Okay, so we'll try doing this freehand as best we can. I'm going to start by just, as best I can, trying to divide this in half, and then draw our bar line at the end, and then divide each of these in half. And then we're just going to put 1 half note and 1 half rest in each measure. Okay, so I'm going to start with the half notes. Let's put 1 in space 2. We'll put 1 at the midpoint of the measure here on line 3. Let's put 1 at the front of the measure again on space 4, and we'll put 1 at the end again, or halfway through really, the measure on, let's do line 4. Okay, so I'm going to add my half rests. So this one will be a light hat sitting on line 3, and we put that about halfway through the measure. Again, this doesn't matter too much, you'll learn it in time, but for now, we'll try to line it up pretty well. Here's my next half rest. This sits on line 3. Another half rest sits on line 3. And another half rest sits on line 3. And I'm just going to add my stems. So this first note is below line 3, so I'm going to go up and on the right with the stem. This is on line 3, so I'm going to go down on the left. Another down and on the left. And another down and on the left. So the final assignment here, music math. The first measure has a whole note, open note head, right, without a stem. The second measure has 2 half notes, open note head, with a stem. Remember that each of those half notes is worth half the value of the whole note. Place 4 notes in the third measure that equal the value of the notes in the first 2 measures. Okay. So if it took 2 half notes to make 1 whole note, we're going to need a note where we need 4 of them to make a whole note. Obviously, those are going to be quarter notes, right? Because a quarter note has 1/4 of the value, and it takes 4 of them to make 1 whole note. 1/4 of the duration of a whole note. So I'm just going to draw them all in the same space for now and answer their question.